The message appeared on every screen across the world at exactly 3:17 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Static flickered first, then a face emerged, if you could call it a face. It had 6 eyes arranged in a circle and skin that looked like polished metal. "People of Earth," the creature said in perfect English. "I am Fleet Commander Zex Kalter of the Vraxian Empire. Your planet has been selected for conquest. You have 7 Earth days to surrender. Resistance will result in total destruction." The screens went black. For 3 seconds, the world was silent. Then chaos erupted. In Washington, D.C., the president called an emergency meeting. In Moscow, generals shouted at each other around a table, covered with maps. In Beijing, scientists rushed to analyze the transmission. From space, satellites detected a massive fleet of ships moving past Jupiter, heading straight for Earth. But in Springfield, Ohio, Betty Johnson turned off her television and went back to baking. "Aliens," she muttered, shaking her head as she rolled out cookie dough. "Coming here uninvited, no manners these days." Betty was 78 years old with silver hair always pulled into a neat bun. Her hands were wrinkled but strong from decades of kneading dough and knitting sweaters. Today she was making chocolate chip cookies for the church bake sale. Alien, invasion or not. Her kitchen phone rang. Betty wiped her hands on her apron and answered. "Grandma? It's Frank. Are you watching the news?" The voice sounded worried. "Hello, dear. Yes, I saw those rude space people." Betty checked her cookies in the oven. "Perfect golden brown," she whispered to herself. "Grandma, this is serious. I'm at Space Command headquarters. The aliens are real and they're coming with weapons we've never seen before." Betty's grandson, Frank, was a captain in the newly formed Space Force. He had always been a serious boy, even when he was little. Never played with toys, always reading books about stars and rockets. "Well, I hope you're being careful," Betty said. She placed her cookies on a cooling rack. "Have you eaten today? You sound tired." "Grandma, we're facing an alien invasion. The entire planet is in danger. We're trying everything, missiles, lasers, diplomatic messages, nothing is working." Betty frowned. "Have you tried talking to them properly? Not with all those fancy words you military types use, but real talking?" Frank sighed. "Their technology is centuries ahead of ours. Our best weapons can't even reach their ships. The world's governments are considering surrender." Betty reached for her rolling pin, a solid wooden one that had been in her family for 3 generations. "Surrender? Nonsense. My father didn't fight in World War II for us to surrender to the first bunch of rude visitors from space." Outside Betty's window, people ran through the streets. Some carried supplies to their cars. Others just ran. A police car raced by, siren wailing. "I need to go, Grandma. Please stay inside and follow the emergency broadcast instructions." Frank's voice cracked. "I love you. I love you too, dear. Don't worry so much." After hanging up, Betty finished packing her cookies into a tin. Then she looked at her rolling pin. It had helped her keep order when she taught 3rd grade for 40 years. It had tenderized meat for Sunday dinners. It had even scared off a burglar once, though she never actually hit him with it. Betty Johnson made a decision. She packed her rolling pin, her cookie tin, and a change of clothes into her old suitcase. She fed her cat extra food and called her neighbor to watch him. Then she got into her blue 1989 Buick and started driving toward the nearest military base, where her grandson Frank worked whenever he wasn't in space. If aliens were coming to Earth, with bad manners and worse intentions, someone needed to set them straight, and Betty Johnson had been setting people straight her entire life. The guards at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base were not expecting an elderly woman in a floral dress to drive up to their checkpoint. They were even more surprised when she insisted on seeing Captain Frank Johnson. "Ma'am, this is a military facility, under high alert. No civilians allowed," said the young guard. Betty smiled and opened her cookie tin. "I'm his grandmother. I brought snacks." The guard hesitated. The rules were clear, but the cookies smelled amazing. He made a call. 20 minutes later, Betty walked through sliding doors into an underground command center. Men and women in uniforms rushed around large screens showing the alien fleet. In the center of the room, around a round table, sat the world's top military leaders. "Grandma." Frank spotted her and hurried over. "How did you get in here?" "I brought cookies," Betty said, as if that explained everything. In a way it did. Frank looked embarrassed. "You can't be here, we're planning Earth's defense." "And how's that going?" Betty asked, looking around at the worried faces. Frank didn't answer, which was answer enough. Betty patted his arm and walked straight toward the round table. Frank tried to stop her, but Betty Johnson had been walking where she wanted for nearly 8 decades. "Excuse me," she said to the group of generals. "I couldn't help overhearing. These aliens seem very rude." The room went quiet. A tall woman with short gray hair and many medals on her uniform looked up. "Who let a civilian in here?" "General Miller. This is my grandmother," Frank said quickly. "I'm very sorry." Betty put her cookie tin on the table. "I'm Betty Johnson. Would anyone like a chocolate chip cookie? Fresh baked this morning." The generals stared at her. Then General Miller took a cookie. She bit into it and her stern face softened slightly. "Mrs. Johnson, we're in the middle of a planetary crisis," Miller said, but her tone was gentler. "I know, dear. That's why I'm here," Betty said. "What have you learned about these aliens?" A scientist in a white coat stepped forward. "Actually, we've made a discovery. The Vraxians have a hierarchical society with extreme respect for authority. Figures. Our psychologists believe they evolved from hive-like communities." "Like bees?" Betty asked. "Similar, yes. But here's the interesting part," the scientist continued. "All of their authority figures share specific traits that trigger automatic submission responses. They display what we call matriarchal dominance signals." "In English, please," General Miller said, reaching for another cookie. "They're afraid of mother figures," the scientist explained. "Our analysts studied their communication patterns and body language. They respond with fear and respect to beings that exhibit what we might call grandmotherly authority." The room was silent again. Then slowly, everyone turned to look at Betty Johnson. Betty was busy arranging her cookies in a neat pattern on a napkin, completely unaware she had become the center of attention. General Miller cleared her throat. "Mrs. Johnson, how would you feel about meeting these aliens?" Betty looked up. "Would that help?" Frank stepped between his grandmother and the general. "Absolutely not. You can't be serious." "We've tried missiles, lasers, and diplomatic professionals," General Miller said. "None have worked. We need something the Vraxians will respond to." Betty reached into her bag and pulled out her rolling pin. It was polished from years of use, the wood smooth and heavy. "If they're anything like my third-grade boys were, they'll listen when I use my teacher voice," Betty said. "And if they don't, well..." She tapped the rolling pin against her palm. The scientist looked excited. "This could work. The cultural shock alone might confuse them enough to buy us time." Betty nodded. "I raised 4 children and taught school. For 40 years, I can handle a few aliens with bad manners." Frank looked horrified. "Grandma, these are dangerous aliens with advanced technology. This isn't like dealing with rowdy kids." Betty patted his cheek. "Different species, same problems, dear. Someone needs to teach them how to behave." General Miller stood up. "Operation Granny Smith is now in effect. Let's get Mrs. Johnson ready to meet the Vraxian fleet." The next morning, Betty sat through what the military called basic training. A young woman tried to teach her how to use a spacesuit. A thin man explained emergency protocols. Betty listened politely, but kept knitting a blue sweater during the lessons. "Mrs. Johnson, this is important," said the trainer. "In case of oxygen loss..." "Dear, I've been breathing for 78 years, Betty said. "I think I've got the hang of it." The trainer looked at General Miller, who shrugged. After lunch, Betty had brought her own sandwich. They showed her the ship she would take to meet the aliens. It was small and white, with the words USS Homefront painted on the side in fresh, blue letters. "It's our newest diplomatic vessel," Frank explained. "Small enough not to seem threatening, but with our best shields and communication systems." Betty nodded. "It needs curtains." "Curtains?" Frank asked. If I'm going to meet important visitors, the place should look nice, Betty said. General Miller smiled for the first time since the crisis began. Get the woman some curtains. By evening, the ship was ready. Betty had packed her rolling pin, 3 tins of cookies, her knitting bag, and a photo album of her grandchildren. She wore her best dress, blue with small white flowers, and sensible shoes. You'll have a crew of 4, General Miller told her. Captain Linda Reeves will pilot the ship. Sam Walters handles weapons, though we hope you won't need them. Olivia Green is our top language expert, and Dr. Peter Hall is a xenobiologist. He studies alien life. Betty shook hands with each crew member. Thank you for joining me. I've packed extra cookies. Olivia Green, a young woman with short black hair, looked nervous. Mrs. Johnson, the fate of Earth might depend on this mission. Yes, dear. That's why we should be polite but firm, Betty said. The crew boarded the ship. Betty sat in what they called the diplomat's chair, which someone had quickly modified with a cushion. She arranged her knitting needles and yarn in the compartment beside her. Frank stood at the foot of the boarding ramp. Grandma, you don't have to do this. Someone has to teach those aliens some manners, Betty said. Now give your grandmother a hug. Frank hugged her tightly. The ship will reach the Vraxian fleet near Mars in about 40 hours. Just follow the communication protocol we practiced. Betty patted his cheek. I'll be home for Sunday dinner. I'm making pot roast. As the ship's door closed, Betty waved to the crowd of soldiers and scientists who had gathered to see them off. Some saluted, some cried. Betty thought they were all being a bit dramatic. The USS Homefront lifted off smoothly. Betty watched through a window as Earth grew smaller. It looked like a blue marble, just like in the pictures. She had never thought she would see it this way. Mrs. Johnson, would you like to rest? Captain Reeves asked. Your quarters are ready. No, thank you, dear. I'll knit a while, Betty said. This sweater is for my grandson. I want to finish it before we meet the aliens. The crew exchanged glances. They seemed unsure about her calm attitude. Betty understood. They were young, and young people often worried too much. As the ship traveled toward Mars, Betty finished the sweater and started another one. This one was larger, with 6 armholes. She wasn't sure if aliens wore sweaters, but it never hurt to bring a gift when meeting new people. Sam Walters watched her work. Ma'am, aren't you scared? Those aliens want to destroy Earth. Betty looked up from her knitting. Young man, I've lived through 12 presidents, 2 world wars, and raised teenagers. Very little scares me anymore. She held up her rolling pin. Besides, I've got this. The crew laughed, tension breaking for the first time. Betty smiled and continued knitting. In 2 days, she would meet the aliens who threatened her world, and she would be ready. But first, she needed to finish this sweater. The USS Homefront slowed as it approached the red planet Mars. Through the main window, Betty could see hundreds of alien ships. They were shaped like giant silver arrowheads, each one bigger than a football stadium. Blue lights pulsed along their sides. Those are the Vraxian ships, Captain Reeves said. Her voice was steady, but her hands shook slightly. Their main vessel is in the center, the one with the red lights. Betty looked at the largest ship. It was at least 10 times bigger than the others. That's where their leader is? Yes, Fleet. Commander Zexcaltur, Olivia said. He's the one who sent the message to Earth. Betty nodded and stood up. She smoothed her dress and checked her hair in the reflection of the window. Let's call them then. Dr. Hall looked worried. Mrs. Johnson, perhaps we should review the diplomatic protocol again. Protocol is just fancy words for good manners, Betty said. I'll handle it. Sam Walters set up the communication system. A large screen lit up in front of them, showing only static at first. Then a face appeared, the same face that had threatened Earth. 6 eyes in a circle blinked at them. Human vessel, the alien said. You have entered Vraxian-controlled space. Explain yourself or be destroyed. Betty stepped forward before anyone could stop her. Hello there, I'm Betty Johnson from Earth. Are you Zexcaltur? The alien seemed surprised that someone addressed him directly. All 6 eyes blinked rapidly. I am Supreme Fleet Commander Zex Kaltor of the Vraxian Empire. Why has Earth sent such a small ship? Where are your military leaders? They're busy back home, Betty said. She held up her cookie tin. I brought snacks. I'd like to talk to you about this invasion business. The alien commander stared at her. Then he turned his head and spoke to someone off-screen in a series of clicks and hisses. When he turned back, he looked confused. Our scans show you have no weapons on board. This is not a military vessel. That's right, Betty said. Just me and these 4 nice young people helping me work this spaceship. It's my first time in space, you know. Zex Kaltor's eyes narrowed. Is this some kind of trick? Why would Earth send an elder female? Because I asked to come, Betty said. She picked up her rolling pin and tapped it against her palm. Now, young man, I'd like to speak with you face to face about your behavior. The alien commander fell silent. The crew of the USS Homefront held their breath. On Earth, military leaders watched the exchange on large screens, fingers hovering over emergency buttons. Finally, Zex Kaltor spoke. You wish to board the command ship, alone? Well, I'll need one of these young people to help me with the technical parts, Betty said. But yes, I'd like to meet you properly. My mother always said important conversations should happen in person. Olivia whispered urgently. Mrs. Johnson, this is not in the mission plan. It's too dangerous. Betty patted her arm. It's okay, dear. He's not going to hurt an old lady. On the screen, Zex Kaltor seemed to be having an internal struggle. According to the scientists on Earth, the alien's instincts were telling him to respect this elder authority figure, but his military training was fighting against it. Very well, he finally said. You may dock at Bay 17. You and one other may board. If this is a trick, we will destroy your planet immediately. No tricks, Betty promised. Just cookies and conversation. The screen went dark. Captain Reeves looked at Betty with new respect. Mrs. Johnson, you just did what our best diplomats couldn't do. You got us invited aboard their ship. People respond to courtesy, Betty said simply. She picked up the 6-armed sweater she had finished knitting. Now, who's coming with me to meet the aliens? The crew looked at each other. Finally, Olivia raised her hand. I'm the language specialist. I should go. Betty smiled. Perfect. Help me pack my cookies, dear, and don't forget my rolling pin. Tiako. The USS Homefront moved toward the massive alien flagship. Betty Johnson prepared to face the greatest threat Earth had ever known, armed with freshly baked cookies, a handmade sweater, and a well-worn rolling pin. The inside of the Vraxian ship was cold and smelled like metal. Betty stepped out of the small connecting tunnel with Olivia close behind her. 5 tall aliens waited for them, each holding what looked like weapons. Welcome aboard, said the tallest alien. His voice sounded like rocks in a blender. I will take you to Fleet Commander Zex Kaltor. Betty nodded and held out her cookie tin. Would you like a cookie before we go? The aliens looked at each other. One reached out slowly and took a cookie. He sniffed it, then put it in a slot that opened in his chest. The slot closed and lights flashed on his neck. No poison detected, he announced. But high levels of sugar and butter? My secret ingredient is a dash of vanilla, Betty said. Try it. I've been making these for 60 years. The alien put the cookie in what Betty assumed was his mouth. His 6 eyes widened, then half closed. This is acceptable, he said, but took another cookie anyway. Betty smiled. First step of diplomacy, complete. They walked down long hallways with glowing blue floors. Aliens of different sizes stopped to stare at the 2 humans. Betty waved at them. Most just blinked their many eyes, but a few waved back with their forearms. Finally, they reached a large room with a window showing the stars. Fleet Commander Zex Kaltor stood in the center, surrounded by screens and smaller aliens typing on strange keyboards. Elder human, he said when he saw Betty. You have entered the heart of the Vraxian fleet. No other species has done this and lived. Betty set down her bag and looked around the room. You could use some plants in here, too much metal, not homey at all. Zex Kelter's eye circle twitched. We are warriors, not gardeners. Everyone needs a bit of nature, Betty said. Now, about this invasion. Why are you planning to attack Earth? The commander seemed thrown off by her direct question. The Vraxian Empire expands. It is our way. Your planet has resources we need. Have you asked nicely if we might share? Betty took out her rolling pin and tapped it against her hand. Something strange happened when she did this. Every alien in the room stood straighter. Zex Kaltor's eyes all focused on the rolling pin. Is that a weapon? He asked. This? It's for making pie crust, Betty said, though my grandson Carl knew it meant business when I took it out while he was misbehaving. Olivia noticed the alien's reaction too. She whispered, Mrs. Johnson, they seem afraid of your rolling pin. Keep holding it. Betty nodded and stepped closer to Zex Kelter. Young man, where I come from, we don't threaten people. We talk about problems. We find solutions. We certainly don't send scary messages to planets we've never even visited. The commander's metal skin seemed to pale. Vraxians do not talk. We conquer. Well, that stops today, Betty said firmly. She pointed the rolling pin at him. Sit down. We're going to have a proper conversation. To everyone's surprise, including his own, Zexi Kalter sat in his command chair. His 4 hands gripped the armrests. Betty smiled and pulled out her photo album. Much better. Now, before we discuss serious matters, let me show you my grandchildren. For the next 20 minutes, Betty showed pictures to the confused alien commander. She explained each photo, told stories about family picnics and Christmas mornings. The other aliens gathered around to see. This is Frank, she said, pointing to a picture. He works in space like you. And this is my granddaughter Kelly, she's a doctor. Why do you show me these? Zex Kalter asked. Because that's what civilized people do, Betty said. We get to know each other before we make big decisions, like whether to invade someone's planet. She closed the album and looked him in his many eyes. Now tell me about your family. Do you have children? The question seemed to shock the commander. I have Spawn, 3 clutches. Betty smiled. Show me. Slowly, the alien commander touched a panel on his chair. A screen appeared with 3 young aliens, each with only 4 eyes instead of 6. They look like their father, Betty said kindly. For the first time, Zex Kalter didn't look like a fearsome alien commander. He looked like a parent. And Betty Johnson knew exactly how to talk to parents. Over the next few hours, something amazing happened on the Vraxian command ship. Betty Johnson sat at a table with Fleet Commander Zex Kalter, drinking what the aliens called nutrient solution from a metal cup. It tasted like warm apple juice mixed with salt, but Betty sipped it politely. So your people have never tried making peace first? Betty asked. Zex Kalter shook his head. The Vraxian way is strength. Our history teaches that talking first shows weakness. That's just silly, Betty said. The strongest people I know are the ones who can solve problems without fighting. A young alien officer approached the table. He stood stiffly and spoke to Zex Kalter in their clicking language. The commander responded and the conversation grew louder. The young alien seemed upset. What's happening? Betty asked Olivia, who had been listening carefully. I think that officer is angry that the commander is talking to us instead of attacking. Earth, Olivia whispered. Betty watched the young alien. His forearms moved quickly and his voice got higher. He reminded her of her grandson Carl during his teenage years. All anger and no patience. Betty stood up and took her rolling pin from her bag. The arguing alien stopped and looked at her. Young man, she said to the officer. Where I come from, we don't interrupt adult conversations, and we certainly don't shout indoors. The translator device around the alien's neck converted her words. His 6 eyes blinked rapidly. You are only a human elder. You have no authority here, he said. Betty stepped closer, rolling pin in hand. I have been a mother for 50 years, a grandmother for 28 years, and a teacher for 40 years. I have authority wherever there are people who need to learn manners. The officer looked at her rolling pin, then at Zex Kaltor, clearly, expecting his commander to punish this human for her words. Instead, Zexcalter stood up. "Officer Kraz, the human elder will be treated with respect," he said. "Return to your post." The young officer made a sound like rocks falling downstairs, but he left the room. Betty sat back down and placed her rolling pin on the table. "Thank you," she said to Zexcaltor. "He seems like he needs guidance." "He is from my third clutch," the commander admitted. "Always angry, always wanting to fight. The Vraxian way." Betty nodded. "I had a son like that. Sometimes the ones with the most fire need the most attention." Word of Betty's visit spread through the alien fleet. Soon, other commanders requested permission to meet her. Betty greeted each one with cookies and questions about their families. She knitted as they talked, her needles clicking softly. Olivia watched in amazement as these fearsome alien warriors sat around Betty like children at story time. They told her about their home planet, their traditions, and their need for certain minerals that Earth had in abundance. "We could trade," Betty suggested, finishing a small forearm sweater. "Earth has many resources and we love learning about new cultures, but we don't respond well to threats." She handed the sweater to a female commander who had mentioned her young spawn were cold on the ship. The alien took it with all four hands, touching the soft yarn with wonder. "Trade? Not conquest?" Zexcalter asked. "It's called being neighborly," Betty said. "Much nicer than war, don't you think?" By the end of the day, Betty had organized what she called a potluck dinner. The USS Homefront sent over Earth foods, and the aliens brought their own strange meals. As they ate together in the command ship's main hall, tensions eased. Olivia sent messages back to Earth explaining the progress. General Miller could hardly believe the reports. The most powerful alien fleet ever encountered was sitting down to dinner with an elderly woman from Ohio. "Is this really happening?" Frank asked as he watched the video feed from Mars orbit. General Miller nodded, a smile forming on her usually stern face. "Your grandmother is teaching aliens table manners, and somehow it's working better than any weapon we could have sent." On the Vraxian ship, Betty refilled a plate with cookies and ignored the occasional shocked stare from alien officers. She had seen that look many times before, on the faces of tough teenagers who discovered that sometimes kindness was the strongest force in the universe. Betty woke up in her guest room on the Vraxian ship. The bed was hard and shaped like a bowl, but she had slept well enough. She put on her dress, fixed her hair, and was preparing to meet Zexcalter for breakfast when alarms began to sound. Olivia rushed into the room. "Mrs. Johnson, something's wrong." Guards appeared at the door, their weapons drawn. They spoke quickly to each other in their clicking language. "What are they saying?" Betty asked. Olivia listened to her translator device. "There's been an attack. A small group of Vraxian ships broke away from the fleet and fired on a human outpost on Mars." Betty's face grew serious. "Take me to Zexcaltor right now." The guards led them through hallways filled with running aliens. The command center was chaos when they arrived. Zexcaltor stood surrounded by screens showing ships firing red beams at a dome-shaped building on Mars. "What is happening?" Betty demanded, her voice loud enough to cut through the noise. Zexcaltor turned to her. "Officer Kraz and other young commanders have rejected our talks. They say I have become weak. They attack your Mars base to prove their strength." Betty saw the screens showing fires and explosions. People could be dying. She gripped her rolling pin tightly. "Stop them," she said. "I cannot," Zexcalter admitted. "They have disabled their communication systems. They follow Kraz. Now." Betty looked at the main screen showing a small group of ships attacking the Mars base. Earth ships were racing to help, but they would be too late. "Then take me to them," Betty said. "That would be too dangerous," Zexcalter said. Betty pointed, her rolling pin at him. "Young man, I did not come all this way to watch people get hurt because someone is having a tantrum. Take me to those ships now." 10 minutes later, Betty was aboard a small Vraxian shuttle heading toward the rogue ships. Zexcaltor had wanted to send soldiers, but Betty insisted on going herself. Olivia came too, looking terrified but determined. "Mrs. Johnson, what are you planning to do?" Olivia asked. Betty checked that her rolling pin was secure in her bag. "I'm going to have a word with that boy." The shuttle approached the largest rebel ship. Zex Kalter's voice came through the speaker, ordering his son to allow Betty's shuttle to dock. At first there was no answer. Then a grudging response came through. "Send the human elder. No one else." Betty patted Olivia's hand. "Wait here, dear, I'll be back soon." She walked alone into the rebel ship. 4 armed aliens met her, leading her to a room where Officer Kraz sat in a commander's chair. He looked surprised to see her walk in calmly, carrying only her bag. "You are brave for a human elder," he said. "And you are rude for someone raised by a father like Zex Kaltor," Betty replied. She set her bag down and took out her rolling pin. "Stop attacking that Mars base." Kraz laughed, a sound like metal scraping. "Or what? Will you hit me with your food tool?" Betty stepped closer, her eyes fixed on his. "Young man, I am very disappointed in you." The alien's laughter stopped. His 6 eyes blinked rapidly. "You have embarrassed your father," Betty continued. "You have broken the peace talks. You have acted like a child, not a leader." She tapped her rolling pin against her palm. "Where I come from, young people who can't behave lose their privileges." Kraz stood up, all 4 arms reaching for weapons. "I am a Vraxian warrior. I will not be lectured by a human." Betty didn't back down. She walked right up to him, rolling pin raised. "I have dealt with troublemakers for 78 years. You are not special. Now sit down." To the shock of every alien in the room, Kraz sat. "Call your ships back," Betty said. "No," Kraz said, but his voice wavered. Betty leaned in, her voice lower. "Your father showed me pictures of you as a little one. You had only 4 eyes then. He was proud of you." Kraz's metal skin changed color slightly. "He was?" "He still could be," Betty said. "If you start making better choices right now." She held his gaze until finally Kraz touched a button on his chair. "All ships, cease fire and return to fleet formation." On the screens around them, the attacking ships pulled away from the Mars base. Betty nodded. "Good. Now, let's go talk to your father about how you're going to make this right." 1 week later, Betty Johnson stood in the White House Rose Garden next to the President of the United States. On her other side stood Fleet Commander Zex Kaltor, towering over the humans around him. Behind them, on a small table, sat the peace treaty between Earth and the Vraxian Empire. "Mrs. Johnson," the President said, "you have saved our planet. How can we ever thank you?" Betty smiled. "Well, I did miss my church bake sale. Someone will need to explain that to Mrs. Peterson." The gathered crowd laughed. News cameras flashed. Betty wore her Sunday best dress and had her hair done special for the occasion. In her hands she held her rolling pin. Zex Kaltor stepped forward. His metal skin gleamed in the sunlight. "The Vraxian Empire has existed for 10,000 years. We have conquered 300 planets. But never before have we made peace this way." He looked down at Betty. "This human elder has taught us that true strength is not in weapons but in wisdom." Officer Kraz stood behind his father. The young alien had apologized for the attack on Mars and had helped repair the damage. Now he nodded respectfully to Betty. The treaty was signed with much ceremony. Earth would trade minerals with the Vraxians, and in return, the aliens would share some of their technology. More importantly, they would tell other alien races that Earth was under Vraxian protection. After the ceremony, Betty's family surrounded her. Frank hugged his grandmother tightly. "I can't believe you faced down an entire alien fleet with a rolling pin," he said. "It wasn't the rolling pin," Betty said, patting his cheek. "It was knowing when to be firm and when to listen, just like raising children." That evening, Betty hosted a special dinner at her home in Ohio. Her small dining room was crowded with humans and aliens. Zex Kaltor had to duck to enter the doorway. His son Kraz bumped into the ceiling light, making everyone laugh. Betty served her famous pot roast with mashed potatoes. The aliens tried each food carefully. They seemed to love butter the most. On our world, all food is processed into nutrient paste. Zex Kaltor explained as he took a third helping of potatoes. This is different. Food should be made with love, Betty said. That's what my mother taught me. After dinner, Betty showed the aliens her garden. They touched the flowers with wonder. Their world had few plants left after years of building cities and warships. We could learn to grow these? Kraz asked. I'll send you seeds, Betty promised. The next day, the Vraxian fleet prepared to leave Earth orbit. Before they left, the Smithsonian Museum held a special ceremony. Betty's rolling pin was placed in a glass case, with a plaque calling it the tool that saved Earth. Betty thought this was silly. I'll need that back for making pies, she told the museum director. We've made you an exact copy, Mrs. Johnson, the director said, handing her a shiny new rolling pin. As the Vraxian ships rose into the sky, people around the world watched on television. Instead of fear, they felt hope. If Betty Johnson could make peace with scary aliens, maybe there was hope for solving Earth's problems too. 1 month later, another alien fleet appeared near Jupiter. These aliens looked like giant blue squids. They had conquered 30 star systems and never been defeated. When they sent a message demanding Earth's surrender, the president didn't call the military first. Instead, he sent a message to Betty Johnson in Ohio. Betty was in her kitchen making apple pies when the phone rang. Mrs. Johnson, this is the president. We need your help again. Betty looked at her calendar. I'm free next Tuesday. Is that soon enough? The president laughed. I'll send a car. Betty hung up and took her rolling pin from the drawer. She had a feeling she would need to pack extra cookies this time. These new aliens looked like they might have bigger appetites. As she packed her bag, Betty smiled. Who would have thought that at 78 she would become Earth's secret weapon against alien invasions? But then again, grandmother power had always been the strongest force in the universe.